Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. So I'm really frustrated with VR still, and I think I've learned a couple of things. First off, you really can't play the Tomcat in VR at the moment. It's just too much to render. There's definitely a difference between jumping in the Tomcat and most of the other planes in DCS. The P-47 cockpit being rendered tends to be a little bit too much on the channel map. And there's a newer version of the Oculus Tray tool that's supposed to change the ASW modes. I've tried adaptive in different settings. I've gotten no better result out of it than I did with the older version of the Tray tool. So not sure if I'm doing anything wrong here, but there was also like a setting called Oculus Homeless that's supposed to take the Oculus Home stuff away when you're playing with your headset too, to give you a little bit more performance, and I can't seem to get that to work right. I enable it and I can still see the Oculus Home thing popping up in the background, so not sure what I'm doing right or wrong there. But I wanted to show you what the Syria Map is like in VR. So first up, we will jump into the Tomcat, and I will show you why the Tomcat is not a good option for the Syria Map in VR at present. All right, I have my frame rate counter up. Let's get this show on the road. So the thing to remember in VR in DCS is the frame rate counter really doesn't tell you the true story about anything performance-wise in VR. Gear up. So it says I'm at about 30 FPS right now. There goes the stuttering that you're going to get every so often. And the issue is while it's telling me I'm at 30 FPS, and I turned ASW off and changed my refresh rate to 60 Hertz for OBS for recording, and somehow or another with that off, I'm getting almost a locked 30 instead of a locked 40 FPS. But ironically, things are performing a little bit better even at this low frame rate. Until you turn, then you see the pausing and the micro stuttering. But performance-wise, there are two factors here in VR. One is the Tomcat cockpit is so amazingly detailed that it chews up some of your performance. It's just a fact. Two, when rendering the lighting at nighttime in DCS, it also chews up some performance. So when you combine something like the most awesome module ever, the Tomcat, with the most beautiful cockpit ever, with so much detail packed into it, with the new lighting features they've included in 2.5.6, then you start to see some serious performance issues when combined, especially in VR. On 2D, not so bad. And I have an i9 9900K and a 2080 Super GPU with 32 gigabytes of memory, and this is all running off of a 1 terabyte SSD. So this is what one would consider a high-end system. But performance-wise in VR, at nighttime, the Tomcat is just really hard to enjoy. Let's look at something else now. Now, in a daylight scenario, my FPS is up around 40. And at altitude, everything seems rather reasonable. Actually, I'm doing about 46 for a minute there. And the other thing to remember is everything is turned down super low in the settings, because the visual detail is just not able to be brought out in VR because it would take even more performance to render. Now, in daytime, over this really densely populated area, it is a bit micro stuttery at points, but it's considerably better than what it was at nighttime. And while the frame rate counter shows me 30 to 40 FPS, it does not feel smooth. What one thinks is smooth and what somebody else thinks is smooth is two different things. But when it comes to VR, the thing to keep in mind is as you have micro stutters and pauses, and things aren't as smooth as they need to be, after you do this for a while, maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes, what have you, um, and you take the headset off and walk away and wonder why you feel sick or have a headache, that's probably why. That is a very big factor in having issues like that, is because if things are stuttery and not smooth, it can almost make you sick. And that's another problem I've had with DCS and VR for a while now. So while I'm in the Tomcat, this is a much better experience than the nighttime experience by far. And it's much more acceptable over what it was. So the nighttime lighting really chews up the horsepower. And while this says I've been as low as 30 FPS, it's still smoother than what it is in nighttime scenarios. But I still do get some micro stutters and pauses, and it really screws with your brain. Um, and that's why you end up feeling sick. Like right now, that's just kind of ugh. And OBS doesn't do a great job of recording the actual video in real time, and it almost creates a choppier experience than what it really is. So keep in mind, it's not as bad as what the recording makes it look like, but it is bad versus a 2D flat panel experience. So let's jump into something else now. We've seen what the Tomcat is like in the daytime, and it's definitely micro pausey and stuttery. Now, here I am in the Viper, and already from the start, I'm getting almost 62 FPS, between 50s and 60s, and it is very noticeable. As we get lower, we're going to drop in that 40 range again, but it feels smoother and more natural. And granted, we're going to get some of those micro stutters and slight pauses, but it's not nearly as bad as what it is in the Tomcat, because look how much cockpit they have to render for the Viper. And that really is a big part of the difference. And it really bums me out because I love the Tomcat so much and I cannot fly it in VR anymore. It's just too much to really enjoy it anymore. But it feels way more fluid, and I feel less like I'm going to get sick versus what it feels like in the Tomcat. Huge difference in performance, I think, even though the frame rate counter tells me something different. So when people say, oh, I get a steady 40, 45 FPS, yeah, the frame rate counter might tell you that. But are you getting the pausing? Is it really smooth? Does it feel fluid, you know? But the Viper definitely feels better. And this is the first time I've been in VR and been able to enjoy the VR experience in DCS in a very long time. So the point I'm trying to make is the frame rate counter does not tell you everything. Honestly, it doesn't tell you much, really, because the fluidity and smoothness of the gameplay is very different from what the frame rate counter is telling you you're getting. And I know there are different shaders that you can get to, I guess, supposedly improve some of the VR performance, but I don't want to mod my DCS. I want things to work out of the box the way that they should. And I also do a lot of making videos, and I don't want to screw up what um, I use in 2D as well. So that's my biggest fear of the shader mods that are out there that help you gain 5 FPS or something, to smooth things out. I'm just hoping that the module makers and Eagle Dynamics can finally come together and work on the performance in VR, because the experience is really cool, but the end result at the moment is anything, but cool. But I am, as you can see, really enjoying flying the Viper today in VR across the Syria map. And again, it really surprises me that I'm able to achieve this level of performance at the moment. And I'm not just talking about FPS, I'm talking about how fluid it is compared to what it has been. And this is a brand new map with tons of detail packed into it, and it's doing this well, which is really cool, and says a lot about the work that Urga Media did on this map for DCS World. So far, I would say the Viper is the most fun plane that I can use in VR at the moment on this map. However, let's take a look at a couple of the other planes and see what kind of results we get with them. Now, here's another plane that really had a hard time in the channel map in VR, performance-wise. It just took a hard nosedive and was really difficult to get the most out of. And on the Syria map at the moment, this one doesn't seem that bad. I'm actually enjoying myself in the P-47 on the Syria map, which is really surprising to me. And at times, I am getting some of those micro stutters here and there, but not nearly as bad as what it was on the channel map. So I'm starting to think that the Syria map is optimized a little better, or much better, than the channel map was at launch. Now, as we approach the more densely populated area of this city, our performance is going to drop a little, but not nearly as bad as it was on the channel map in VR, which is a real pleasant surprise because I'm really enjoying the Syria map. And again, in many months, this is the first time I've actually been able to jump in and enjoy some DCS stick time in VR. And I can see a few of the micro pauses, but it's not as bad as what it was before, to the point to where I feel like I'm going to get sick when I take off the VR headset. Now, right here, things are a little bit choppy compared to what they could be. So I'm pleasantly surprised that the P47 is playing pretty nice in VR. Far from perfect, but considerably better than what it was before when I was doing this on the channel map. All right, and here we are, an Eagle Dynamics flagship product, the FA-18C Hornet. And once again, I'm seeing as low as the 30 FPS mark here, but doesn't seem like 30 FPS. And I'm not seeing considerable stutters. Things actually feel rather decent. Especially with so many trees on the screen right now being drawn. I mean, in a perfect world, I would love to hit a solid, consistent, smooth 60 FPS with no stutters. But I just don't see that happening in DCS anytime soon because as they continue to add new graphical features and improvements, it just piles up and adds to the level of performance that is required to run the engine at that point. But again, this is the first time in many months that I've actually been able to enjoy flying any aircraft in DCS. And externally, we're hitting as high as like early 60s in terms of FPS right now, which is really nice. Alrighty. We are in the Sa342 Gazelle. And smack dab in the middle of all of this beautiful terrain is where you're probably going to see the most performance drop anywhere. And I'm feeling it right now. If you keep the stick pretty steady and you don't turn your head too drastically, the experience is pretty cool. It's when you have to move or you move too quickly past things that things get a little micro pausey or stuttery at times. Now, it's been a minute since I've jumped in helicopters and enjoyed them. The other day I made a video in 2D in all of the various helicopters that DCS has to offer at the moment. But in VR, at low level, it does look rather nice. And this really isn't too bad. I've definitely seen much worse. And look at the number of trees and how many objects are on the screen at the moment. And it looks like it's kind of capping me at around 30 FPS at the moment. So I'm not sure if it's the new Oculus Tray tool that's helping me out or not, but there is a newer version and I started running it as well while making this video to try something different because I've really been grasping at straws to try to get my performance better in VR. And the only real sad part is all of these details are turned down so low that it's really hard to enjoy as much as I can on my 2D flat panel because I know what it looks like in 2D, and the difference is very different. Look at this giant building. Uh-oh, power lines. Wow, I just missed those. Now, what are these? Buildings under construction. That's kind of cool. All right, and here we are in Big Bertha, the MI8, which is always a good time to fly. For as big as this thing is, it doesn't feel as heavy as you would expect it to feel. It almost just kind of floats. But down low, I'm actually able to enjoy flying this guy in VR too, which is really cool because I love helicopters. I'm really looking forward to the Kiowa now and the Mi-24P Hind. So again, the frame rate counter is showing I'm right around 30 FPS, which is reasonable. Because in DCS, the number of frames that you're achieving based on what that counter tells you and what the experience is like seems to be two very different things. As long as you're not getting all the micro pauses and the stuttering, 30 FPS is actually really nice. It's when you're at 40 FPS or 50 FPS and you're seeing all the micro pausing and stuttering, that's a worse experience than I'm getting right now at 30 FPS. So I think the conclusion at the moment is the new Oculus Tray tool is something worth trying. Avoiding nighttime missions in VR is probably a good idea because the lighting effects that they've added in 2.5.6 are absolutely beautiful, but they push the hardware pretty hard. And lastly, stay the hell out of the Tomcat in VR. That is the hardest to render cockpit out of all the modules in DCS, and it definitely seems much harder to enjoy without micro stutters and pausing than any of the other aircraft in DCS at the moment. So, like I said, I'm glad to report that I'm able to jump in here and actually have a little bit of fun in VR again. And I'm really enjoying the Syria Map in helicopters and in fixed wing aircraft both. But the helicopters are really relaxing flying across this map in VR. I just wish I can turn my detail levels up some more because in VR, when you have everything turned down to low, all of the textures, all of the options, things look a little bit washed out and less realistic. And I know what it looks like in 2D is the problem. If I didn't know how awesome it was in 2D, I really wouldn't be missing it so much in VR right now. But these trees look really nice, and I'm really surprised by how well this is actually performing at the moment in VR. And again, OBS might not convey how good this actually performs right now and how well it is running. But I can tell you that even though it says 30 FPS up there, it feels better than the 40, 45 FPS lock that I was getting before with all of the stuttering. This is really fun and it feels a lot more fluid. And again, I think the key thing is in a helicopter, you're not making those drastic turns and moving quickly. And that could be why I'm able to enjoy the VR experience a little bit more with my Rift-S right now than a fixed wing aircraft where you're juking and turning and pulling some G's and just pulling some, more aerobatic type maneuvers when you're fucking around and flying, in a fixed wing aircraft versus in a helicopter where you have to be much more careful and a little bit more precise about your movements, especially when you're usually flying low to the ground like this. but there are so many really nice windy roads here and valleys that you can just follow and almost make a mini game of it and enjoy flying choppers on the Syria Map in DCS. Some of these turns are very hard to make. And look at this crazy road. Yeah, like I'm going to follow that. Man, I don't even think a car can handle some of these roads they have in here. Who created these things? That's a bit much. So anyways, I think a couple of the viewers were correct that VR does seem a little bit better than it was before. But I would be careful with nighttime missions and environments. And the Tomcat. As much as I absolutely love the Tomcat and the work that Heatblur has done on it to create such an amazing, just awesome work of art, which is that cockpit, at the same time, it's a double-edged sword because in the VR environment, that cockpit is too much. But even in that 2D environment, rendering that cockpit when it first came out took more performance in 2D than any of the other modules in DCS. So it's only natural that in the 3D virtual reality environment that it also has a cost for use, as this is looking pretty goddamn good right now, and it's really performing nicely in VR, which hasn't happened for quite some time. So I'm going to leave it at that, guys. But like I said, avoid nighttime environments, stay out of the Tomcat, and check out the new Oculus Tray tool, and you might be able to get by in VR. But again, everything is turned down pretty much to the minimum right now in my graphical settings for this, because if I touch anything, it just ends up being a slideshow. And I'm letting the Oculus Tray tool handle my pixel density, and I'm running a pixel density of 1.5. Anything higher really kills things for me. So, as always, thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. Feel free to hit that like button. And until next time, guys,